that's why in the opening chapters of Genesis we're described as formulated in the image of God. We're like a microcosm of the process that gives rise to order itself. It's a very different view than the bottom-up materialistic view, let's say, of the Enlightenment in the scientific world. It's a different way of looking at things. It's the notion that what is in front of you is a field of indeterminate possibility. It's got some implicit structure, as the scientists insist, but it's open, and you grapple with it like you grapple with your dawning consciousness in the morning. What confronts you in the morning is a field of possibility, and you approach that with a certain kind of orientation, and you use your words and your linguistic capacity to think to shape that possibility. And if you do that properly, then you make, this is the Genesis 1 insistence again, you make the order that's good or very good, and that depends on your orientation. So in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, which is an instruction manual, Christ tells his listeners how to orient themselves in the world properly. So he says, first, aim with all your heart at the highest good you can imagine. Now, you'll get better at that as your vision clears, but that's the orientation, to do what's right. Now, you might say, like Pontius Pilate said, well, what is right? What is truth? But most people know the difference between right and wrong. You know at least step by step what would move you forward and upward. So you orient yourself to the highest possible upward place. Then you make the assumption that other people have the same intrinsic value that you do. So that's your initial aim and presumption. And then you pay attention to the moment. And that's often the statement that gets Christ confused with the hippies, to consider the lilies of the field who don't toil or spin. But that's not the instruction. The instruction is to aim up with everything. And then, having that firmly in mind, to pay attention, as much attention as you can to each moment, to allow the words to come to you that best suit that upward aim, not to subordinate your language to your own machinations or manipulations or your own hedonistic desire, but towards what's right. And if you do that, then what emerges out of possibility is akin to the garden, to the original garden in Genesis 1, and it's the order that's good. Truthful language brings about the order that's good. And that's a very accurate way of portraying the role consciousness plays in bringing about reality. So, and it's not that viewpoint, by the way, isn't limited to the Judeo-Christian canon. You see the same thing in the Taoist representation, because in the Taoist world you have a domain of order, that's the black serpent, and you have a domain of chaos. Sorry, I have it reversed. The domain of order is the white serpent, and the domain of chaos or possibility is the black serpent in the Taoist image, the two snakes, head to tail. And your job is to walk the line between them. And you can tell when you're walking that line because that's where things are maximally meaningful. And so that's another element of this vision, which is that if you orient yourself with upward aim and you straddle the line between order and chaos, then things become maximally meaningful around you. So, and Musk, I just did a podcast with Elon Musk, and he talked about resolving his existential crisis, the existential crisis that he experienced when he was about 11 or 12. It was a crisis of faith, essentially. And the way that he resolved that and then motivated himself so intensely was by understanding that if he pursued the path of the expansion of knowledge, that would be intrinsically meaningful. That's the path of growth. That's the path of adventure. All of that. And it's aligned with what matures you and makes you more responsible and sets the world in order. And the instinct of meaning signifies all that. And so I've written a lot about that in this new book, We Who Wrestle With God. And that's what I've been lecturing about in 60 different cities, walking through these biblical stories one by one, partly because we have this wrestling match going on in our culture, let's say, between the nihilists and the atheists and the true believers you might say. And one of the faults of that war is that no one stops to elucidate or delineate exactly what it is that we're arguing about. So you have people like Dawkins, they parody the traditional conceptions of God, a superstitious being, nothing more than a defense against death, anxiety, or the opiate of the masses, the old man in the sky. The conceptualization of God in the Old Testament and the New Testament is unbelievably sophisticated. And to reduce it to that kind of parody is a stunning disservice.
Dawkins is an odd duck. He's an odd duck because I think he knows also that there is some value in psychedelic experiences, but he's scared to have them. And
he won't look through Galileo's telescope.